Hey you, what if the greatest barrier to understanding consciousness isn't its complexity, but our insistence on just one scientific story about it? Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we take the most fascinating source material you send our way and extract the mind-blowing nuggets you absolutely need to know. Before we plunge in, if you dig getting seriously informed in an entertaining way, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss our next deep dive.
Yeah, definitely do that, because today we're venturing into, well, a profound mystery. The mystery that is you.
Right, that inner voice, that feeling.
The vividness of a memory, yeah. The sheer subjective feel of being alive.
Yeah.
What is it? I mean, where does it actually come from?
It's utterly bonkers when you think about it. It's an incredible personal experience,
Yeah.
all just sort of bubbling up from a hunk of matter in our skulls.
It really is.
And today, we're tackling your request, a deep dive into Matthew Colborn's Pluralism in the Mind. Think of this as your ticket to understanding one of the biggest head-scratchers in existence.
It's a bold book, Colborn's work. A really bold exploration. It challenges that dominant scientific view.
And one that says it's all just brain chemistry.
Exactly. He argues consciousness isn't just some byproduct of physical processes, but something, well, far more intricate.
So we're here to unpack his key ideas, connect the dots.
And hopefully make this, really complex topic surprisingly clear, or at least clearer.
Yeah, clear is good. Prepare for a journey that's going to stretch your brain, probably in the best possible way. We'll be navigating everything from the fundamental weirdness of being conscious to how our historical baggage, our assumptions, shape the way we even ask the questions.
It's a long road, definitely. A winding one.
But trust us, the view from the top, worth it.
We'll start with the big picture, the very nature of our subjective experience, and then zoom in on some truly fascinating details, always keeping our focus on that central enigma consciousness.
Okay, let's dive right in then. The subjective experience problem. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
You look up at a pale blue sky, maybe some fluffy clouds.
Right.
It's not just data your brain is processing, is it? There's an actual feeling to that experience.
That specific shade of blue.
Yeah. Or a sense of calm, maybe. Or, remember, Mrs. Riordan in the book uses that example. Maybe she smelled like lavender.
Right.
Had that specific eyebrow raise.
That vivid memory.
It's not just information retrieval, is it? It's like a faint reliving of the sensory hit. And that feeling of utter presence,
Yeah.
standing on a beach, totally somewhere else.
Everyone knows that feeling.
These aren't abstract things. They're the very fabric of our conscious lives.
And these examples, these vivid moments, that they really highlight a fundamental puzzle, what people often call the explanatory gap.
It's the gap, okay.
Yeah, cognitive science can, meticulously map the neural activity when you see that sky. Or remember Mrs. Riordan, we can see which bits light up.
The wires and the sparks.
Exactly, the electrical signals, the chemicals firing. But how do we get from that purely physical description
to the feeling?
Yes. The rich, qualitative feel of blueness or the sensory texture of the memory, it feels like a massive jump, doesn't it?
It really does. Like, how does electricity become blue?
Right. Can science ever bridge that gap? Or maybe that's not even the right question to be asking.
It's like trying to dissect a joke,
Yeah.
right? You can explain the setup, the punchline, the wordplay, but that doesn't explain why it's funny. That spark of amusement.
Exactly. The book points out for some things, like the mind's eye and the visual cortex, we are seeing correlations. Tight ones, even.
Okay, so there's progress.
Some progress, yeah. But does every single conscious experience have a neat neural correlate? And even if it does, what is that connection?
Still a mystery?
Still shrouded in mystery, yeah. And Colborn raises this crucial point about how often we use the word illusion in consciousness studies.
Ah, right. Free will is an illusion. The self is an illusion.
Precisely. When our current scientific models struggle to explain something subjective, qualia, free will, whatever the tendency is, often to just label it an illusion, a trick of the brain.
Convenient.
Well, the book asks, if we keep having to explain away core parts of our experience as illusions, doesn't that maybe point to a deeper problem?
Like, maybe the tools are wrong.
Exactly. Maybe our underlying frameworks, our scientific toolkit, isn't quite the right fit for this particular job.
Okay, now this is where it gets really twisty. The book argues that people studying consciousness often act as if the basic rules of the universe are fixed, like 19th century classical physics fixed.
Yeah, set in stone.
But the 20th century completely blew that up, didn't it? Quantum mechanics, relativity.
A radical upheaval, yeah. Suddenly reality at the deepest level looked totally different. Probabilistic, weirdly interconnected, observer-dependent.
So the bedrock shifted.
Massively. And that's a vital insight. The physicist Henry Stapp, he's quoted in the book, he observed that philosophers of mind often seem to live in this hermetically sealed world.
Like they missed the memo from physics.
Kind of.
Yeah.
Seemingly unaware of these huge revolutions in understanding the physical world, if the very basis of science shifted so much.
Should that affect how we study consciousness?
You'd think so. It's like trying to understand, I don't know, the internet using only the principles of smoke signals. It just doesn't compute.
Right. Trying to build a supercomputer with Navicus. And this brings us to Paul Feyerabend, the intellectual rebel the book talks about.
Ah, Feyerabend. Yes.
He basically argued that science isn't this neat, straight line to truth. He questioned the idea of one right way to do science.
Especially for something as weird as consciousness.
Exactly. He worried that clinging too tightly to one dominant approach might actually be holding us back, stopping us seeing other possibilities.
He called it methodological anarchism, which sounds more chaotic than it perhaps is. He argued for more openness, more pluralism in how we investigate things.
Don't lock down the rules too early.
Precisely. Especially when you're exploring the unknown. Prematurely limiting our methods, our perspectives, could just stifle discovery. The book mentions the Journal of Consciousness Studies as a place that tries to foster this kind of diverse, sometimes unconventional thinking.
And yeah, consciousness studies is definitely a wild place. You've got the folks mapping every neuron, thinking that's the key.
The scan it and understand it camp.
Right. But then you have people wrestling with Chalmers' hard problem, even if we knew everything the brain was doing physically.
Why? The feeling.
Exactly. Why isn't it all just dark inside? Why aren't we just sophisticated robots, philosophical zombies?
And beyond those mainstream neurocognitive approaches, the book does touch on some more unconventional ideas, fringe theories, some might call them.
Like what?
Well, ideas about consciousness existing beyond the brain, maybe operating at a distance, or proposals for fundamental units of consciousness, things called psychons or shins. Even Dawkins' memes could be seen in a related light, though more metaphorically.
Wow, okay. So way out there stuff, too.
Definitely highlights the sheer range of attempts to grapple with this thing.
Now, the book is pretty skeptical about the idea that current physics and biophysics have all the answers wrapped up.
Refreshingly so, I think.
Yeah, I mean, we're still figuring out basic biology, let alone consciousness, so assuming our current science is the final word, probably not wise.
It's crucial that intellectual humility, our models, are just that, models, representations. They're constantly being revised. Assuming completeness now could just blind us.
And I really liked this bit. The book takes aim at those big, bold, is-of statements you hear.
Oh, yeah.
The brain is a computer. Consciousness is information processing.
Everything is matter.
Right. The book suggests, maybe more gently, using more relational language.
A shift away from those definitive claims. So instead of the brain is a computer, maybe.
Maybe some brain functions can be usefully modeled with computers.
Exactly. Acknowledges the metaphor's power without equating the two. Or instead of everything is matter, perhaps everything appears to interact with what we currently call matter. More cautious.
And then there's that relentless optimism, almost like a faith, that technology will just solve all these philosophical problems eventually. Just wait till we upload our brains.
The book rightly calls that a pretty positivistic assumption. The idea that tech progress automatically equals philosophical resolution.
Yeah, maybe not.
The book cautions against it. Tech gives us new tools, new data, sure. But will it solve the core mystery? Maybe not on its own.
Speaking of data, neuroimaging, fMRI, EEG, all that brain scanning tech.
Huge explosion of data.
Absolutely. The book acknowledges that.
Yeah.
But it also waves a big caution flag about how that data gets interpreted sometimes.
Those breathless headlines.
Totally.
Okay.
Scientists find the God spot or whatever. It's easy to get carried away by the pretty brain pictures.
Indeed. Neuroimaging gives invaluable insights into correlations, but the book really stresses the need for critical thinking.
Correlation isn't causation.
In the classic line, but it's true here. And interpreting those complex patterns, it needs careful stats, understanding the tech's limits.
Because these mind sciences, their influence isn't always neutral, is it? The book quotes Wallace pointing out how Western approaches empower the knowledge creators, the scientists. But they can also sideline other ways of knowing, other cultures' perspectives on the mind.
That's a crucial point. Science isn't made in a vacuum. It's shaped by culture, history, power structures. Dominant ways of thinking can just sort of crowd out other views.
Okay, so consciousness is baffling, and our science might have blind spots. Now, the book takes this really fascinating turn. It suggests our big ideas about consciousness, about who we are, our place in things. They're like fundamental myths.
Right, not myths like fairy tales, though.
No, more like the core stories we tell ourselves to make sense of it all.
Exactly, these coherent narratives we construct. And importantly, they often go beyond strict empirical evidence, because science alone can't always give us the deep why.
But they're not just random, the book says. Think about the medieval worldview.
Okay.
It wasn't just superstition. It was this complex thing woven from observing nature, religious texts, Aristotle's ideas.
This whole tapestry.
Yeah. And it served a purpose, right? It gave a framework for society, for everyone's place in the hierarchy.
And these big myths, they aren't static. They change. New discoveries, shifting cultures, arguments, they evolve. Just like scientific theories get revised, our basic stories about ourselves adapt too.
It's wild to think how different our whole conceptual world is from someone back then. The book paints a picture of them maybe being more tuned into their moods, less future-focused, living in a world drenched in symbols.
Illiteracy was common. Their cosmos was totally different, that whole great chain of being.
Right. Aristotle's idea, placing everything in a hierarchy from rocks up to God.
That provided the dominant frame for centuries. Everything had its place, its purpose.
And before Aristotle, you had Plato. So huge, they say all philosophy is just footnotes to him.
Yeah, that quote.
He split reality into three: the physical world, the world of perfect forms or ideas, and the mind. The physical was just a shadow for him.
And the mind, for Plato, was tied to the immortal soul, the psyche, with its three parts: appetite, spiritedness, and reason, pre-existing the body, continuing after death. Quite a picture.
But Aristotle, his student, wasn't buying the separate world of forms.
No, much more grounded.
He focused on matter and form being inseparable. And his four causes: material, efficient, formal, final.
Right. What it's made of, how it got made, its essential structure, and its purpose, like that seed example.
Yeah, material is the seed stuff, efficient is the parent plant, formal is its seedness, and final is becoming a new plant. A very different approach to Plato.
Definitely. His focus on empirical observation, matter, and form together, a big shift.
Okay, fast forward. Early modern period. Boom. Scientific revolution. And the focus shifts massively. Understanding nature, sure, but also controlling it.
Yeah, that control aspect was key.
And the book highlights how nature was often framed as female, something to be pursued, probed, even tortured metaphorically to reveal secrets, like in Bacon's writings. And the book suggests this attitude came from a mix of things, maybe occult traditions, Greek rationalism, Bacon's push for empirical power.
A complex brew feeding into this new, more aggressive stance towards nature.
Then comes Cosmopolis and the main man, René Descartes. Shakes things up big time.
The famous, I think, therefore I am.
Right. He wanted a worldview built purely on reason, chucking out tradition, unreliable senses, and his big move: splitting mind from body.
The famous Cartesian split. Res cogitans and res extensa.
Thinking stuff versus physical stuff. He saw the body as just a machine, basically. Even memory was mechanical animal spirits opening pores in the brain.
Sounds quaint now, but hugely influential. Mind as immaterial thought, body as a physical mechanism governed by physical laws.
But this neat split created a monster headache, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. The interaction problem.
If they're totally different substances, how the heck do they interact? How does a thought move my arm? How does stubbing my toe cause pain in my mind?
Descartes never really cracked that one, and it's plagued dualism ever since. People tried other ideas like parallelism, mind and body running side by side but not touching.
Still doesn't quite feel right, does it?
It remains a major hurdle for any dualist view. How can non-physical mind push physical body around, and vice versa?
And Descartes just swept away older ideas, like Aristotelian animism, the idea that natural things have souls or life forces.
Yeah, out it went.
Suddenly the cosmos isn't alive anymore, it's just this giant clockwork machine. Only the mind, somehow interacting with the body, was the ghost in the machine.
That shift to a mechanistic worldview was absolutely central to the scientific revolution, and Descartes was key in defining it.
So 19th century comes along. People are still grappling with Descartes' legacy, that mind-body split. The book notes that even as they argued, most people still accepted the basic difference between physical mechanisms and mental qualities.
The type difference was largely taken for granted.
But then, the physiologists arrive with their experiments showing all these undeniable links between brain bits and mental stuff.
The empirical evidence starts piling up.
And the idea that mental abilities might live in specific brain areas starts to gain real traction. Localization.
Yeah, the 19th century saw this huge growth in studying the brain empirically. Physiology provided more and more evidence for a close brain-mind link, pushing back against pure Cartesian abstraction, paving the way for materialism.
At the same time, you get romanticism pushing back against pure Enlightenment reason.
Right, emphasizing feeling, intuition.
But they weren't anti-reason entirely, more about broadening the picture to include inner life. It created space for a different kind of inquiry.
A critique of excesses, maybe, but still within that broader search for understanding, just adding emotion, imagination, individual experience to the mix.
And then things get, well, weird.
Mesmerism.
Mesmer and his animal magnetism.
This vital fluid flowing through everyone. Mesmer and his followers claimed they could induce altered states, healings, even things like clairvoyance.
It sounds like early hypnosis research, almost. Puisiger, one follower, did focus more on the psychological side of the magnetic sleep.
Definitely a forerunner to dynamic psychiatry, the book says, highlighting suggestion, altered states. Even if the physical basis, the magnetic fluid, was eventually dismissed, it was a huge cultural thing.
But yeah, the establishment wasn't convinced. Ben Franklin was on a commission that investigated it.
And concluded.
Power of the imagination, basically. Ouch. Still, it did raise awareness of the mind-body connection in its own odd way.
Even debunked, it sort of paved the way for later work on hypnosis, the power of psychological factors.
Meanwhile, the materialists are gaining ground. Lemaitre declares, man is just a machine, mind is just matter.
Bold statement.
And physiological experiments seem to back this up. Legalis finding the respiration center, Florin's showing the nervous system controls behavior in animals.
Lemaitre's man is a machine idea found fuel in this growing evidence of the brain's crucial role.
And then the incredible, awful case of Phineas Gage.
The railroad worker, the iron rod.
Right through his skull. He lived, but his personality totally changed. Huge evidence for brain damage affecting personality, bolstering the materialist view. Mind tied tightly to the physical brain.
Gage became a classic textbook case, didn't he? A striking example of brain determining mind.
Then you had phrenology, Gall and Sperksheim, reading bumps on the skull to gauge mental faculties.
Sounds ridiculous now.
Yeah, but it did popularize the idea of localization of function, different brain bits doing different jobs, even if their method was bunk.
It planted a seed, you could say. The idea that function might be localized, which later science would investigate more rigorously.
And then, the earthquake. Darwin.
Evolution by natural selection.
Building on his grandfather Erasmus and others, this idea, explaining life's diversity through descent with modification, just blew up the biblical creation story.
They put humans firmly inside the natural world, not separate from it.
Plus the Neanderthal discoveries around then, reinforcing the idea of human evolution.
A massive shift in understanding our origins and place in nature.
Huge controversy, obviously. The book quotes someone saying society would crumble if Darwin was right.
High stakes.
But on the other side, you had fierce defenders like Huxley, Darwin's Bulldog, and Herbert Spencer, forming groups like the X Club.
Promoting science as the superior way of knowing.
Yeah, basically arguing science was the only reliable way. Some even dreamed of a church of science replacing religion.
Huxley and the X Club were definitely influential in pushing science to the forefront, sometimes quite aggressively.
But Huxley himself threw a weird wrench in the works with his epiphenomenon idea.
The steam whistle analogy.
Right. Mind is like the whistle on a train. It makes noise, but doesn't actually do anything causal. It's just a byproduct.
Which feels totally wrong, doesn't it?
Completely. It flies in the face of our feeling that our thoughts matter, that our decisions cause actions. If mind is just a passive observer, what's the point?
Exactly. Huxley's idea, while maybe consistent with pure mechanism, created this deep clash with our everyday experience of agency.
Okay, so late 19th century. The book calls it a golden period for mind sciences. Lots of different approaches popping up, trying different methods. Not a unified thing at all.
A vibrant, diverse time. Psychology just starting to emerge as its own field.
Enter William James, huge figure. He focused right on states of consciousness and famously used introspection, looking inward, as a key method.
Though his introspection was more nuanced than earlier versions.
Right. He had theories about will, attention, these pulses of attention shaping experience.
James really shaped psychology, emphasizing consciousness as this dynamic, changing process. His mix of introspection and philosophy was incredibly rich.
And he famously described consciousness not as static things, but as a flowing stream of thought.
The stream metaphor, yeah, captures that continuous flow.
And here's a key point he made. He was super skeptical about explaining the link between brain and thought. He basically said, look, science has no clue how one produces or transmits the other.
So wrestling with that one today, aren't we?
Totally. Even with fancy scanners, that fundamental production-transmission problem, it's still there.
James saw that core mystery very clearly, the gap between brain stuff and subjective experience.
Which brings us to those transmission or permission theories. The idea that maybe the brain isn't making consciousness.
But maybe filtering it or allowing it through.
Yeah, like a reducing valve for some bigger consciousness field or something. But then, what is it filtering? If it's mind or consciousness, we're just pushing the problem back.
That's the big challenge for those theories. They propose the brain as an intermediary, but then they have to explain the source of what's being transmitted or permitted. It doesn't eliminate the mystery.
James also saw mind and matter as basically metaphors.
Yeah.
Useful ways to talk, but not necessarily fundamental realities.
Aware of language's limits.
He even toyed with phenomenalism, the idea that reality is just our experiences as a way to maybe dodge the dualism problems.
Pragmatic approach. If prioritizing experience resolves philosophical knots, maybe that's the way to go.
And get this, William James, giant of psychology, was also deeply into psychical research.
Telepathy, clairvoyance, the paranormal stuff.
Yeah, he was friends with Frederick Myers, another really interesting, maybe controversial figure.
James's openness to that was significant, willing to explore phenomena outside the conventional science of his day.
Myers. Okay, he went really speculative. He talked about his subliminal self.
A deeper level of consciousness.
Yeah, with potentially huge capacities, maybe even surviving death, moving through spiritual spheres, very spiritualist.
Tied into the movements of the time.
But the book makes a good point. Even if you ditch the afterlife stuff, Myers' ideas about hidden mental processes, the complexity of the self, maybe some of that is still valuable.
His insights into the multi-layered self, unconscious processes, they did have a lasting impact, even if the spiritualism remains contentious.
But then, wham, another huge shift. Behaviorism.
Watson and Spinner.
They basically said, mind, consciousness, unscientific, can't observe it. Psychology should only study observable behavior and the stimuli that cause it.
Black box the mind, focus only on input and output.
Introspection, out. Objective observation, in. Suddenly, psychology got a lot narrower.
The radical break, aiming for rigorous objective science like physics.
Skinner even dreamed up a utopia based on conditioning. But the book raises serious ethical flags.
Totalitarian potential.
Yeah, and who conditions the conditioners? That uncomfortable question.
Always the issue with those grand behavioral engineering schemes.
Behaviorism ruled for decades, but it had problems. Ethical issues with animal experiments. The book calls it a virus that psychology never fully shook off.
Strong language.
Yeah, suggesting psychology might still lean too hard on reductionism, lab work, seeking simple neural or genetic causes for complex stuff, that physics envy.
While it brought rigor, rejecting the inner world definitely limited its scope and raised those ethical flags. Its legacy might still linger in that tendency towards reductionism.
But the pendulum swings again. People got fed up with behaviorism's limits, and a new way of thinking emerged, using computers as an analogy for the mind.
The cognitive revolution.
Fueled by information processing metaphors. Mind as computer.
Behaviorism couldn't really explain complex things like language, memory, problem solving. Information processing offered a new framework.
Cybernetics, Norbert Wiener's idea, was key here. Studying self-regulating systems, feedback loops, information flow, in machines and living things, and the development of actual digital computers, especially Turing's work, provided this powerful analogy. The mind is software running on brain hardware.
Cybernetics and early computing provided the conceptual tools and the central metaphor for cognitive science.
Turing even came up with his famous test. If a computer can chat indistinguishably from a human, is it thinking?
The Turing test. Still a benchmark, kinda.
And interestingly, decades later, AI models have passed the Turing test, but we can't definitely say that they are quote-unquote thinking.
Shows how complex human intelligence really is. Defining intelligence, let alone consciousness, is harder than it sounds.
This split the AI world. Strong AI believers think machines can become conscious.
While weak AI folks see computers just as useful tools for studying mind, not replicating it.
Then comes functionalism. Then it's a big name here. The idea, mental states aren't about the stuff they're made of, neurons or chips.
But the job they do.
Exactly. Their function, their causal role in a system. Like a thermostat metal or plastic. Its function is regulating temperature.
Makes sense.
Dennett also gave us the intentional stance. We understand complex systems, people, animals, even computers sometimes, by just assuming they have beliefs and desires. It's a useful strategy.
Functionalism focuses on causal roles, sidestepping the substance debate. And the intentional stance is a pragmatic way to predict behavior.
But functionalism got hit with critiques too. Hillary Putnam worried it could be too narrow and too broad.
Chauvinistic and liberal, yeah. Denying mind where it might be, granting it where it clearly isn't.
And the big one, qualia, those raw feels. Critics say functionalism just can't account for the subjective quality of experience. How can a function feel like red?
That remains a major sticking point. Can qualia be reduced to functional roles? Big debate.
And the book's overarching point, these grand visions, mind as machine, mind as software, they tend to come and go.
They're often provisional. What seems like the answer now might look very different later.
Okay, so after that historical roller coaster, the book comes back to this deep human need, creating framing mythologies. Big stories to explain everything.
Our existence, our place, that fundamental need for meaning.
And these myths, again, aren't just made up. They're woven from observations, existing beliefs, cultural needs, complex stuff.
A mix of the empirical and the conceptual, shaped by context.
And here's a provocative bit.
Right.
The line between science and pseudoscience, not always so clear-cut.
History shows that.
Like Newton, father of physics, also into alchemy. Phrenology, wrong, but spurred localization ideas. Myers, bit paranormal, but had insights into the subconscious.
The boundaries have often been blurrier than we like to think retrospectively. Science is messy sometimes.
But by the 20th century, mainstream science got really good at filtering out a priori nonsense, stuff that didn't fit.
Which is necessary for rigor, of course.
But the book suggests a downside. Maybe it limits our willingness to consider truly novel, paradigm-busting ideas, especially with something like consciousness.
Yeah, that balance between rigor and openness is tricky. Too rigid, and you might miss something revolutionary.
Then we hit the big philosophical battle. Ontology. What's fundamentally real? Monism says it's all one kind of stuff.
A strong drive towards monism in the West, especially materialistic monism.
But the book points out even defining physical has changed hugely since Descartes or Newton. Not so simple.
The ground keeps shifting under these terms. What counts as matter or physical isn't fixed.
So within monism, you've got different flavors. Monistic idealism, Berkeley's idea, only minds and ideas exist. Matter is just a perception construct.
Mind as primary reality.
Then materialistic ontologies, mind comes from matter. Popper breaks this down. Behaviorism, mind is behavior. Panpsychism, matter has mind-like qualities. Epiphenomenalism, mind's a byproduct. Identity theory, mind is brain states.
Quite the menu of materialist options, each trying to explain mind within a physical world.
Many rely on ontological reductionism, explain everything by breaking it down to fundamental physics.
But how does consciousness emerge from non-conscious bits? That's the hard part for reductionism.
Panpsychism tries to solve that by saying maybe some proto-consciousness is there all along, in everything.
Building blocks of mind are fundamental, perhaps. Avoids the emergence problem, but raises others, like how do simple bits combine into complex minds?
Epiphenomenalism mind, as a useless byproduct, just feels wrong intuitively.
Hard to square with our sense of agency.
And identity theory mind is brain activity still struggles with qualia and whether thoughts themselves actually do anything or if it's just the underlying physics doing the work.
If the thought is just the neurons firing, does the thought have causal power or just the firing? Tricky.
The book also touches on memory complexities. The simple idea of specific memory traces might be wrong. Holographic models also have issues. Memory seems way more complicated than we thought.
Yeah, how the brain stores and retrieves memories is still a huge area of research. No simple answers there.
And then back come those rogue phenomena, psi, stigmata, past life memories.
The stuff that really doesn't fit the standard model.
If real, they seriously challenge purely brain-based theories. Mainstream science dismisses them, often seeing them as superstitions or errors.
Rooted in pre-scientific thinking, perhaps? Lack of replicability, conflict with known laws?
But at the book's point, empirical data alone can't settle these deep ontological fights.
Why not?
Because interpretation is everything. Our assumptions shape how we see the data. There's always ambiguity.
So data doesn't speak for itself entirely. Our frameworks filter it. Got it.
So we're not stuck with just monism or dualism. Popper proposed trialism. Physical world, mental world, world of objective knowledge, like math.
Penrose, too, with his Platonic math realm.
But Searle dismisses trialism as just adding unnecessary mystery.
So different camps on how many fundamental worlds or kinds of stuff there are.
Ultimately, the book argues maybe trying to reduce subjective experience to abstract models is the wrong goal entirely.
So what's the alternative?
Maybe the task is to understand how our rich inner experiences relate to our scientific maps of the physical world, acknowledging those maps are incomplete.
Understanding the relationship, not necessarily reducing one to the other. Okay.
Which leads to the book's core argument, pluralism. Move away from seeking one grand theory. Embrace different levels of explanation, different ways of knowing that aren't reducible to each other.
Resisting reductionism and fundamentalism, the belief in only one right way.
The book mentions those mid-20th century philosophical dead ends, endless debates on perception, memory, language that made people skeptical of finding one solid foundation for knowledge.
Foundationalism took a hit. The idea of building knowledge on an unshakable base seemed less plausible.
So, echoing Feyerabend, keep options open, especially exploring consciousness. Don't restrict ourselves prematurely. Our worldviews are always partial.
Maintain that intellectual openness. Acknowledge the vastness of the unknown.
Rorty even suggested a relaxed physicalism might do.
Yeah.
Let psychology do its thing without constant pressure to reduce to physics. He wasn't big on finding hidden ultimate truths.
A more pragmatic approach. Let psychology work at its own level.
So we have this whole spectrum of views. Is mind a thing, an illusion, a process? The book reminds us even unobservable things like mind have been useful in science, even if their ultimate nature is debated.
Theoretical entities often play crucial roles, even if we can't directly see them.
And there's the realism versus anti-realism debate. Do things like quarks or mind really exist as theories describe, or are they just useful tools?
Chalmers suggests realism based on structure. Maybe the relationships are real, even if this stuff is unknown.
But the book notes structure might not capture the messy, qualitative nature of mental states very well.
Yeah, applying structural realism to subjective feelings seems tricky.
Okay, so even if our theories capture something real, the book argues against forcing them all into one grand, unified scheme. No single pyramid of knowledge.
Right. Challenging that urge for a theory of everything, even within science itself.
Nancy Cartwright's alternative.
Yeah.
Think of science like a collection of balloons. Local theories that work well in specific situations. They overlap, inflate, deflate, but don't all rest on one base.
The balloon model versus the pyramid model. Science is more patchy, local, context-dependent.
Because let's be honest, many scientific laws only work under strict conditions. Ceteris paribus, all else being equal.
Right. You need those nomological machines, Cartwright calls them, specific setups, to make the laws generate predictable results. Outside that setup, maybe not so predictable.
Are they truly universal then? Or just powerful descriptions of what happens in controlled boxes?
That's your point. It limits their claim to universality.
She uses the discovery of Neptune. Newton's laws worked great until Uranus went wobbly. Needed to tweak the shielding conditions account for Neptune's gravity to make the law fit again.
Shows how applying laws needs attention to specific context, potential interferences.
So Cartwright prefers talking about capacities, inherent tendencies things have, rather than rigid laws.
More like potential behaviors.
Yeah. Nomological machines then channel these general capacities into specific, predictable systems. Like the general capacity to learn gets channeled into specific learning context, language, math.
Capacities as fundamental tendencies realized differently in different setups. Interesting.
This really matters when applying natural science models to humans. Because human behavior is so messy, unpredictable, individual.
That tension between finding neat models and respecting human uniqueness and agency.
Can we really capture human capacities in reducible, structured ways? The book urges caution. Respect the facts that don't fit the model, especially in human sciences, to avoid dehumanizing people.
The ethical dimension. Don't force people into theoretical boxes if the fit is poor.
Feyerabend again. Maybe alternative facts come from alternative theories. Progress sometimes requires challenging norms. But if scientists dismiss clashing ideas out of hand, are we stifling progress?
His argument that sticking too rigidly to paradigms can hinder discovery.
The book worries about reducing humans to automatons, running on rules, these nomological machines, the deterministic implications for free will, responsibility.
Questioning that purely mechanistic view of human beings.
It brings in Bennett and Hacker's idea of dispositions, inherent tendencies of things to behave certain ways. Even a marble tends to roll downhill. A nod back to Aristotle's inherent causal powers.
A more nuanced view than just external forces on passive objects. Things have tendencies.
Which leads to, do living things have a different kind of causal agency than rocks?
That seems plausible.
Think of a salamander regrowing a limb. Goodwin's self-completion of individuation. Maturana and Varela's autopoiesis, self-making, self-maintaining systems.
Living things seem actively involved in their own existence in a way machines aren't.
Althusser adds another layer. Unfathomable complexity. He argued there are limits to understanding organisms just by summing their parts. Holistic biology acknowledges this.
Resisting pure reductionism. The whole is more than, or at least different from, the sum of its parts.
He even invoked Bohr's complementarity principle from quantum physics.
Position versus momentum uncertainty.
Yeah, generalized.
Yeah.
Maybe the more we know about molecular details, the less we grasp higher-level organization. Can't just reduce everything to molecules.
An inherent trade-off in levels of description for complex systems. Intriguing idea.
Althusser thought biology needed to start by admitting these limits, his principle of ordered heterogeneity. He was also skeptical of simple memory traces, suggesting holistic memory tied to the whole organism's capacities.
Which sounds a bit like
Sheldrake's morphic fields. Yeah, the book notes the resemblance.
non-local fields shaping development and memory.
Yeah, definitely outside the mainstream.
Then Robert Rosen's relational biology. Focus on organization, not just parts. Organisms as fundamentally different kinds of material systems needing relational descriptions.
Not vitalist, but anti-reductionist. And he even brought back final causes, purpose within complex systems. Big implications for mental causation.
Reintroducing teleology, carefully defined within complex systems science.
And what even is life? The book notes, defining it, physiology, genetics, thermodynamics, shapes how you see it. Are we gene machines? Electrodynamic systems? The definition matters.
How we frame the question influences the answer we find.
So key ideas on biological causation. Maybe downward causation, higher levels influencing lower. Causal accounts can be complete, but not the whole story. Maybe internal telos without an external designer.
Nuanced views on causation in living systems.
It also critiques presentism, dismissing old science just because it's old. Maybe old ideas still hold value.
Avoiding the arrogance of the present, yeah.
Back to AI. Early predictions were way off, right? Turing thought thinking computers by 2000.
Didn't quite happen that way.
Whitby argues AI has had huge tech success, but maybe we wrongly assumed AI laws would mirror biological intelligence laws.
Maybe intelligence isn't just one thing implemented the same way everywhere.
Alexander's neural Darwinism networks, learning via selection, simulating representation, imagination, attention, but still based on assumptions.
Computational models aiming to capture brain-like learning.
And Searle's Chinese room argument against strong AI. Syntax isn't semantics. Manipulating symbols isn't understanding.
A classic critique of the purely computational view of mind.
But functionalists say, if it formally reproduces thought, it is thought. Function is key. And this whole mind as computer analogy was born from early tech.
Brain as hardware, mind as software. Deeply influential metaphor.
But the book notes the ironic dualism lurking here. Moravec's information dualism, like reinventing the soul digitally, leads some to ask, does the brain even process information fundamentally? Or is that just our metaphor?
Questioning the core metaphor itself. Is it accurate or just a useful fiction?
Alternative, dynamical systems approach. Cognition isn't step-by-step computation, but continuous interaction between organism and environment, unfolding in real time.
More embodied, interactive, context-dependent view. Neural nets are dynamical systems. Our minds are parts of broader systems.
Even dynamical systems often explain away subjective consciousness as illusion or epiphenomenon.
Still struggling with qualia, often.
And the book stresses the difference. Living systems are autopoietic, self-making. Machines are allopoietic, made by others. Big difference in self-organization.
Fundamental distinction in how they exist and maintain themselves.
Weizenbaum warned early on about applying abstract computational models uncritically to the real world, especially humans. And the book says, questioning the computer metaphor isn't rejecting Enlightenment values. We can appreciate cognitive science's contributions, but still be critical.
Healthy skepticism about the limits of our models doesn't mean throwing out reason.
Conker remains optimistic. Consciousness will fall to empirical research. Graver offers his causal mechanical model pluralism within mechanism, but these still operate largely within physicalism.
Mainstream neuroscience largely believes the answers lie within the brain's mechanisms, even if the details are complex.
Okay, so what are the mainstream scientific ideas about consciousness mechanisms? The book surveys them. Awareness, qualia, conscious content. Mostly assuming neural mechanisms are key, framed by infoprocessing, computation, dynamics, cybernetics.
Standard toolkit applied to consciousness?
But finding neural correlates of consciousness, NCCs, brain bits lighting up, has limits. Correlation isn't causation, and it doesn't explain why that firing pattern feels like anything, doesn't bridge the gap.
NCCs show what correlates, but not how or why consciousness arises from it.
It's funny how we keep using intentional language, selfish genes, selfish neurons, when describing supposedly mindless mechanisms.
Language pulls us back towards agency even when we try to be purely mechanical.
But the book acknowledges strong evidence. Specific brain structures are needed for specific experiences. Visual cortex damage means loss of vision. Tight link, even if mysterious.
Necessity is clearly shown in many cases. Brain damage has undeniable effects on consciousness.
Specific theories mentioned. Integrated information theory, IIT consciousness, relates to integrated information complexity.
Tononi's idea, highly mathematical.
Global workspace theory conscious stuff is broadcast widely in the brain, available to many modules.
Bars, Dehen, like a spotlight or blackboard.
Thalamocortical rhythms theory synchronize gamma waves between thalamus and cortex create consciousness.
Specific neural oscillations as the key mechanism.
But Bars warned, assuming brain structures transparently show their function might be wrong. And Stapp, still pushing quantum theory as necessary, rejecting classical determinism in the brain. Cloud-like quantum mixtures.
Quantum consciousness, still not widely accepted in neuroscience, partly seen as dualistic. Koch and Hepp strongly argue for neurobiological explanations instead.
Neuroimaging, revolutionized brain study, yes, but limitations. Practical, statistical.
Definitely. Mind reading in labs is often just above chance, context-dependent, not like in the movies.
And those inflated correlations sometimes found in fMRI studies due to stats issues, lack of standard methods, makes you skeptical of headlines claiming region X causes Y.
Need for caution in interpreting fMRI results is paramount. Methodological debates continue.
Isolating functions is hard too. The brain is so interconnected, non-linear.
Not just simple modules working alone, massive interaction.
Linus argued the cortex isn't just input, process, output. It's intrinsically active. Udall accepts localization for basic sensory motor stuff, but skeptical for higher cognition, hard to define, brain too complex. Plus, the subtraction method's limits. Activation doesn't prove necessity, could just be communication.
Important critiques of simplistic localization and the assumptions behind fMRI subtraction methods.
Remember that vegetative patient showing brain activity when imagining tennis?
Powerful case. Suggested awareness despite no outward signs. Shows limits of behavioral observation for consciousness.
Even studying memory with neuroimaging is tricky. Separating encoding retrieval, recovery after injury, bridging scales from scans to synapses, questioning if memory is just synaptic change.
Huge challenges in using neuroimaging to fully understand memory mechanisms.
The book's punchline here. Applying info-processing metaphors literally to the brain is mistaking our manufactured knowledge for nature itself.
Mistaking the map for the territory, essentially.
That thought experiment. Even if we had a perfect mind reader, seeing Bill Clinton in your brain activity, would it prove physicalism?
The book argues no.
Just like Newton didn't preclude Einstein. Powerful tech reveals correlations, but doesn't automatically settle deep ontological questions.
A correlation, however strong, isn't necessarily a complete explanation or proof of a fundamental worldview.
Okay, part 4. Deeper into pluralism, more speculative stuff. Having shown the limits of physicalism, especially with qualia.
The book states its core aims.
1. Defend subjective experience as primary, irreducible. 2. Advocate relational views where subjects and objects. 3. Use Buddhist relational views to critique Western theory's limits. Because despite scanners, we still don't grasp qualia, those raw feels.
Setting out its stall. Prioritize subjective experience, adopt relational perspectives, use cross-cultural insights.
William James, again, stressed the individual mind-shaping responses, finding purely scientific views shallow for lived experience. Firebend even suggested mental concepts might be so alien to science's physical concepts, maybe we should just ditch them like phlogiston.
James emphasizing the personal. Firebend questioning if mental terms even fit within a scientific framework.
Bennett and Hacker critique private experience linguistically. Important points, but the book finds their total dismissal unconvincing. Then the reductionists. Subjective experience is just illusion.
Critiques of private language versus the insistence that subjective experience is illusory. Different angles of attack.
Churchland doubts introspection's reliability. Sound waves don't sound like salutes. Kinetic energy doesn't feel like warmth. Maybe experience misleads us about reality. Then it goes further. No qualia at all. Needs a Cartesian theater, which doesn't exist. So qualia are complexes of reactive dispositions we need to destroy to understand. But the book says this relies on one specific interpretation of experience.
Eliminative materialism versus Dennett's functionalist critique of qualia. Both aim to dissolve the problem of subjective experience, but the book pushes back.
The book argues language just can't capture all of experience. We shouldn't expect to reduce everything to tidy systems. Maybe subjective experience is a primary reality, irreducible to a third-person frame.
Acknowledging the limits of language and potentially granting ontological status to subjective experience itself.
It suggests phenomenology, Husserl's study of consciousness from the inside, as one way forward, and notes Madhyamaka Buddhism goes further, questioning the experience-experience split, even objective reality.
Philosophical tools like phenomenology and more radical non-dual views from Buddhism.
Leads to relativism.
Reality judged individually, culturally, different subjective worlds, argues against reducing subjects to objects or brain processes, and emergentism. Wallace argues consciousness is so radically different, maybe it doesn't even fit that category.
Questioning reductionism, considering cultural relativism, and highlighting the uniqueness of consciousness as potentially beyond standard emergence. The book suggests our physicalist models might just be incommensurable with consciousness. Folk psychology handles it, but isn't scientific. So maybe property dualism, physical and mental properties, or pluralism is needed to fit consciousness into science's object world.
If current frameworks can't fit consciousness, maybe we need frameworks that admit fundamentally different kinds of properties or realities.
Delves more into Buddhist relational views, Madhyamaka. Phenomena are relative, interdependent, no sharp objective-mental split. Everything arises together.
A non-dual perspective emphasizing interconnectedness and lack of inherent independent existence.
Where did consciousness come from? Panexperientialism. Maybe basic experience is fundamental to everything. Or radical emergence. It's truly novel, arising only in complex systems. Should we study the universe's creativity? Some say even radical emergence isn't radical enough for consciousness.
Competing origin stories. Consciousness as fundamental versus consciousness as a truly novel emergent phenomenon, each with challenges.
Theories positing mind consciousness first often sound teleological, purpose-driven. Science avoids teleology, but the book notes even mechanism implies design. Are conventional evolutionary theories enough for consciousness?
The tension between teleology and mechanism, and questioning if standard neo-Darwinism can explain the subjective mind.
Reviews neo-Darwinism, variation, selection, etc. All biophenomena, including mind, evolve from insensate matter via natural selection.
The standard biological account?
Then the ultra-Darwinists, Dawkins, Dennett. Darwinism as a universal asset explaining everything. Dennett's cranes, good bottom-up explanations versus skyhooks, bad teleological stuff, polemical stuff.
The strong adaptationist view versus critiques that it might overreach, especially concerning consciousness.
But the core problem, evolutionary emergence of consciousness. How does subjective feeling arise from non-feeling matter? Alexander's radical emergence, Bergson's continuity of being, panexperientialism again, all face challenges.
Various philosophical attempts to bridge the gap between matter and subjective experience within an evolutionary context, none fully satisfying.
Teleological theories can explain anything, maybe too easily. But the book notes the absurdity accepted in science versus the appeal of a living universe metaphor.
The explanatory challenges of teleology versus the potential intuitive resonance of a universe where consciousness is more fundamental.
Leads to free will. Neuroscience suggesting we're neuron puppets. Defines free will, determinism, categories. Strong determinists, no free will. Libertarians, yes, free will. Compatibilists, they can coexist.
Setting up the free will debate and its key positions.
Wegner's illusion of conscious will. Feeling of willing is separate from action's cause. Evidence. Neurological cases, action speed, automatisms. Critics. Maybe consciousness isn't just an observer.
Wegner's influential of the debated view that conscious will is a post hoc interpretation, not a cause.
Leibniz experiments. Unconscious brain activity precedes conscious decision. Maybe will doesn't initiate, but can veto.
Yeah.
Methodology debated.
Lippitt's controversial findings on the timing of conscious will and his own veto interpretation.
Compatibilism tries to reconcile them. Dennett. We have meaningful free will via reason, even if determined. Critics. Murphy Brown. Dennett's bottled-up causation doesn't capture mental influence. Rose skeptical of downward causation.
Compatibilist strategies, focusing on different definitions of freedom and critiques regarding mental causation.
Murphy Brown argue new laws emerge with complexity. Hodgson's C laws, empowering guiding laws, like Cartwright's capacities. Minds arise via self-organization, non-linearity, chaos.
Emergentist views suggesting higher-level laws and causal powers arise in complex systems like the brain.
They include Deacon's symbolic threshold, language boosts causal power, Metzinger's self-model. But book worries, are they narrowing meaning and qualia to fit models?
Integrating various theories, but potentially at the cost of simplifying core concepts of subjective experience.
Conclusion. Even these nuanced views, often flawed by uncritically accepting monistic physicalism and an objective universe, might overlook other perspectives.
Suggesting the underlying philosophical assumptions might still be limiting the scope of the free will debate.
Now the hidden continent.
Yeah.
The unconscious. If most cognition is unconscious, what about the self, that unified feeling?
Big implications for our understanding of selfhood.
Evidence for subconscious thought, automatisms, typing, Ouija boards, dissociative behaviors, hypnosis, creative insights, seemingly from nowhere.
A range of phenomena pointing towards significant mental activity beyond conscious awareness.
Spanos suggested DID is a learned social role. Metzinger's self-model theory. Self is part of a brain simulation, but book critiques his deterministic view of causation.
Social versus neurosimulation views of self and identity, and critiques of underlying assumptions.
Meyer's subliminal self. Wider, deeper unconscious, maybe explaining psi, grounding a unified self. Barr's global workspace. Vast unconscious feeds conscious workspace. Tart. Altered states reveal hidden self. Cognitive science often sees fragmented modular self. Bennett Hacker critiques self as philosophical error. Broad suggests unified self that can fracture.
A spectrum of views on the unconscious and the self, from deep and unified to fragmented and constructed.
Conclusion. Explaining creativity, maybe rogue phenomena, might need more than robotic preconscious plus shallow virtual self. Maybe submerged consciousness or platonic self.
Suggesting current models might be insufficient, hinting at the need for theories accommodating deeper or more fundamental aspects of self-consciousness.
Finally, those rogue phenomena, stigmata, past lives, stuff that challenges neural state-only theories and core beliefs.
The anomalies that don't fit neatly.
Trossi. Skeptics can be rationalist believers, not open-minded. Collins Pinch. Don't stamp out the strange too quickly in science.
Cautioning against dogmatic skepticism and premature closure in scientific inquiry.
3 case studies. Claretta Robertson's Stigmata. Gansfeld experiments suggesting non-chance ESP results, despite criticisms. Stevenson's work on kids' past life memories. Many criticisms, but intriguing. Notes Stevenson's replies, Grodd on witness psychology.
Presenting specific examples of challenging phenomena and acknowledging both the evidence and the criticisms.
Skeptics Hyman Weissman. No replication, no theory, no laws for CSI. Row counters. Parapsychology tries to understand hard-to-fit phenomena. Criticisms are vague or apply elsewhere, too. Book asks, must all real phenomena be lawful by our current standards? Feyerabend progress often means abandoning standards.
The ongoing debate between skeptics and proponents in parapsychology, touching on fundamental questions about scientific evidence and lawfulness.
Conclusion. Don't discard data just because it contradicts other data or theories. Open inquiry needs grappling with anomalies.
A plea for empirical open-mindedness, even when data is challenging.
So, wrapping up the book's argument. Our worldviews are somewhat arbitrary, shaping perception. For cynicism. Key questions. Attitude towards different worldviews. Is a unified theory desirable? Book says NO to one-size-fits-all theory for consciousness. Breaks from pervading assumptions.
Summarizing the book's skeptical stance on universal theories and its emphasis on the constructed nature of worldviews.
Note commercial interest can undermine scientific neutrality. Book stance. Science has limits. Implies cultural epistemological relativism. Conventional science favors physicalism. But maybe Rosen, relational biology like allomorphism, or Elsasser, holistic memory like parapsychology, offer bridges. Learn from physics about incorporating the observer.
Highlighting the book's leanings towards relativism, its critique of scientific limitations, and potential bridging concepts from unconventional thinkers.
Book leans towards rejecting universalism, admitting scientific limits, embracing some relativism. Notes alternative therapies assuming interactionism can work. Reminds us Descartes' dualism dilemma is historically contingent. Argues against blindly accepting expert authority. Individuals have right to assess claims via experience reason.
Emphasizing the book's call for critical thinking, acknowledgement of limits, and respect for individual experience alongside scientific evidence.
Draws parallel. Neuroscience, now like early genomics, hopes for brain blueprint. But will it solve fundamental questions about causation, self, sight phenomena? Dissociative identity disorders, or DID, seems uncertain. Relatively certain only about multiplicity of possible conceptual worlds within experience.
Concluding with remaining uncertainties, but a confidence in the plurality of possible ways to understand and experience the world.
Wow. Okay. That was an absolutely mind-bending deep dive, wasn't it?
It really was a journey through some incredibly complex territory.
We've gone through the baffling enigma of consciousness, explored the real limits of just explaining it all physically.
And how history and culture shape the questions we ask.
Right. We wrestled with free will, the slippery self, and even peeked at those really rogue phenomena.
We've explored the book's powerful case for, well, a more pluralistic approach, hasn't it? Acknowledging the limits of science, the mystery of subjective experience.
Yeah, and it leaves us with that really provocative thought, doesn't it? Given the limits, given the mystery. What other ways of knowing, what other perspectives might be valuable?
What else might hold insights? It's a question that definitely lingers.
A question worth pondering long after this deep dive ends.
The book really encourages that kind of reflection, considering alternatives beyond the current boundaries.
So a massive thank you to you for sharing this incredibly rich, really thought-provoking source material with us.
And thank you for joining us on the journey.
Yeah, and for embarking on this truly consciousness-expanding deep dive. Until next time, keep those questions coming and stay curious.